I'm Farmer Greg, and with Farmer's Footprint, we're offering this free course, The Happiest Compost on the Block. You're gonna learn the basics of composting, what to compost and what not to compost. Then you're gonna learn different composting techniques so you can see the pros and cons of each one and figure out which one's best for you. Then we're gonna learn the best thing, worm composting, and how to turn that into black gold, AKA garden gold.
Greg, so what is compost?
Glad you asked. Compost is pretty much organic matter that has been broken down and eaten and consumed by microorganisms, and it turns into perfect fertilizer or almost like perfect soil. It's a way of having a waste stream turn into a positive input. It's a way to lower your carbon footprint and get really active biology into your garden, which is going to help your plants thrive.
Why is it important that everyone starts composting?
Well, it's important that everyone starts composting to minimize the waste streams. It's been said that 30 to 40% of food is wasted in America. So this is a way to minimize your carbon footprint, minimize a waste stream, and actually utilize a waste stream to make it into something positive, like a fertilizer for your garden. Another reason it's good to compost is because the plants need this biologically active material. It's the best thing you can do for your garden.
And what is compost made of?
Compost is made of different materials, such as green and brown materials. For example, a brown material is called a carbon source, are things like dried straw, wood shavings, bark, cardboard, dried leaves, shredded paper, egg cartons, and coffee filter paper. Then we have our green materials, aka the nitrogen source. These include green plant material like green leaves and stems, grass clippings, fresh animal manure, fruits and veggie scraps from your kitchen, eggshells, coffee grounds, tea bags, feathers, and even hair and nail clippings. So basically, we stick to raw, uncooked fruits and vegetables and green material from plants, and then also the brown material from cardboard, shredded paper, or straw. When you put the browns together with the greens, they mix, and with oxygen and moisture, it creates a happy environment for microorganisms to eat all that, break it down, and the broken down material after that can be applied directly to your garden, and it helps the plants like really grow fast.
So can anyone compost?
Anybody can compost. You can do it indoors, we can do it outdoors. There's different techniques for the amount of material that you have. So if you only have 1 or 2 people or a family of 4 or 5, you can have a small bin or a larger bin. We can also get into worm composting, which is really easy to do at home and extremely beneficial.
Does compost smell bad?
When you add the proper ingredients, compost won't smell bad. Usually, if it smells bad, there's an imbalance in your ratio of brown to green materials, or too much water or too little oxygen, something like that. So, in a proper compost system with the right ratio of browns to greens, nitrogen to carbon, it will not smell. Usually, the brown material, the carbon material, neutralizes a lot of that smell. So, just to be sure, we just add more of that dried brown material.
What's the right temperature of compost and how do you monitor it?
Well, when you add the right ratios of brown and green material, eventually it's gonna heat up in a pile to 130 to 150 degrees for a certain couple days, and then it's gonna drop down. And after that, once it starts dropping down, you turn the pile, which is introducing oxygen, and that pile is gonna heat back up and then go back down again. Keep repeating that process until it doesn't heat up anymore. And the way to check the temperature is 2 ways. One, you can literally like kind of stick your hand in the pile and see how hot it is. Or 2, you just get a long thermometer and you can put the thermometer into the compost pile and it'll tell you how hot it is.
Farmer Greg, what has compost taught you?
Well, composting has taught me to really reduce my waste streams and turn the waste streams into a positive stream. So also it's it's a way to really connect with nature. It takes a little bit of time and patience and the right elements. Also realizing that we're not so different than these microorganisms in the ground. They need food and oxygen and water, and just like we do. So when you set up the right conditions for these microbes to thrive, then they do all the work for you.
I hear there are different types of compost. Can you explain those?
There's three main techniques for composting. One is called hot compost or thermophilic, and that's a technique where you put your brown and green material together, and in a couple days it'll heat up and it gets to 130, 150 degrees. So that's pretty hot. And then you can introduce oxygen and it'll stay hot for a certain amount of time, for a couple weeks. And that's a really fast way to break down your compost materials into perfectly usable compost. So hot composting can take anywhere from like 1 to 3 months. Another technique is static pile or cold composting, and that's a long-term pile where it's pretty much you layer in your green and brown material and leave it in a pile or a tub of some sort, and it can take 6 months to a year to break down, or maybe even longer. And that's more of a hands-off approach because you don't have to physically introduce oxygen to it. You just put it in a pile and then kind of let it do its thing.
Wait, so you mean layering it like a lasagna?
Like a lasagna, just layer of brown, layer of green, layer of brown, layer of green, and then just kind of layered like a lasagna.
Sounds yummy.
Yeah, it becomes yummy. And then the third type of composting is worm composting or vermiculture. And that's pretty much a technique where you just put in your green and brown material and you introduce worms to that pile, and they will eat and consume your food scraps and your cardboard on its own. The only advantages and disadvantages of that are that you just have to buy worms, or you have to attract some worms to your pile. The best ones are red wiggler or composting worms. Sometimes earthworms can be okay too, but the red wigglers really do a good job.
Cool. Should we go see some compost?
Yeah, let's go. All right, so we're in my backyard and I set up 6 different types of composting systems. And this is the first one. We use it for hot composting usually. This is a 3 bay system. You notice bay 1, bay 2, bay 3. What we do is put your brown and green material in the first bay. As it piles up, it will heat up and we'll monitor the temperature. And at a certain point, we're gonna physically use a shovel or pitchfork to move all this material that's in here into the middle bay. We'll monitor the temperature again, and then one more time, take all the material from here and shovel it into the final bay so it can cure and become really useful compost. As you can see, this is pretty DIY. It's made from pallets that you can reclaim, and a couple screws to go in the back. This space is about 12 feet long by 4 to 5 feet wide. You can make them a little smaller, so this is good if you have a lot of space and or a lot of material, because it takes a lot of material to fill up the whole entire bay. This is one of the fastest composting techniques. So if you turn it and do it right, it can take a month. It could probably closer to 3 months, but it's one of the fastest ways to break down all this organic matter to become perfectly good compost. This is the in-ground composting system, where you just pretty much bury a bucket of any size. This is a 5-gallon bucket, drilled some holes into the side and buried it halfway in the ground. What this does, when you add your brown and green material in here, it'll either slowly break down on its own, or you can add some worms or try to attract some worms. They will go through those holes in the bucket and start to break down that material a lot faster. So if you were to purchase worms, say you bought a pound of worms, they will consume half their body weight in a day, which is pretty significant. And so this can be really quick as well, but it either takes time to establish the colony of worms in this bucket, or you just have to purchase worms to speed up the process. At my farm, the Cardiff Tiny Farm, we have multiple of these set up around the farm, and what we do is fill it all the way up with food scraps and green waste. And then once it's full, I'll just start to fill up the next one, another one next to it. Once the worms fully consume all of this material, they will move on to the next bin. And then once this one, the worms are out of this one and it's just all worm castings, you can take this one out of the ground and then apply that to your garden. So it's really easy to use. So this is a version of the Johnson Sioux bioreactor, and pretty much it's a trash bin or a bucket with some holes in the side, and we're going to add our green and brown material in the middle. But this one has a percolated pipe in the middle that kind of stands free flowing, and that helps oxygen kind of flow through the bin. It speeds up the process a little more. Again, we buried this kind of just in the ground a little bit, just a couple inches, and this allows for worms to pass through these holes, and then we'll go in and inoculate or colonize this pile here that's in there. So as far as timing goes, if you fill this bucket completely full and cover it, it'll take 6 months to a year to break down, which is quite a long time, but you don't have to turn it or anything. Just let it break down on its own, so it's pretty hands-off. That's one of the pros. Disadvantage, I guess, is you just have to buy a bucket and drill some holes in there. If you were to purchase worms also, that would inoculate the pile and colonize the pile. It would break down a lot faster. So not too many cons, just have to either buy worms and buy the bucket, and worms are optional. So, and speaking of worms, here we have our DIY worm bin. These are 2 5-gallon buckets, and one of them has no holes. This one on the top has holes in it, so we just have to drill holes in here, fill the bucket with brown and green material, and then if you purchase worms or can attract worms, put the worms in there and they will eat and consume all of your veggie scraps and yard clippings. This technique is also really good to gather the worm tea, the compost tea. So as the worms consume the food, some liquid is going to drop from the holes in the bottom, and then this bucket that has no holes will collect all the liquid. And that's like a worm tea or worm compost tea. That stuff can be mixed with water in equal parts and spread to your garden soil. It's a very, very good fertilizer, very easy to do, and extremely effective. And of course, you can purchase all of these things online and at nurseries, garden centers, but this is just a way to kind of do it yourself, and things you can, if you have materials at your house where you can just kind of make things yourself. Really cool. And I'm going to show you how to build this worm system, how to operate it, and then how to use it as well. So this is another technique for either hot or cold composting. This is pretty much a chicken wire wrapped in a cylindrical fashion. You can use fencing. I made this one myself, just putting it all together, pretty basic. For cold composting or long-term composting, we're gonna fill this, we're gonna lasagna layer this with brown material, then green material. And once you fill it up, you have to wait like 6 months to a year to fully break down, which is quite a bit of time. But if you don't wanna wait that long, you can just fill it up and then remove this entire basket and then move the pile into that basket afterwards. It'll speed up the process. It takes anywhere from like 1 to 3 months as opposed to 6 months to a year. This system is called a compost tumbler system, and pretty much I purchased this one. This is a large one. It's about 4 or 5 feet long. There's smaller ones that are about 2 feet long, but really good for at-home composting. Pretty much just fill all your material into this bin, and then to turn it, instead of physically turning with a shovel, all you have to do is just crank down on this guy, and it turns and aerates the soil. It's pretty quick. It can take 1 to 3 months, but sometimes just like 1 month, because you're constantly introducing air, which speeds up the process of composting. The advantages and disadvantages. One disadvantage is that because you're turning so much and a lot of oxygen is in there, The finished compost tends to be more bacterially dominated, which is good for green growth, but it doesn't have much fungal microbial life in there. And the fungal compost is better for like setting fruit and things, and fruit trees. So this technique is good for highly bacterial compost, but not so good for highly fungal compost. One of the advantages of this is that it can just be set on a porch or a patio or a balcony, so anybody can do it. You can get a small one, like I said, that's just a foot or 2 feet long. Another good advantage is that it's off the ground and it's pretty sealed, so no critters or rats are gonna get in there. The smell is kind of condensed if you don't get your ratios right, which can lead to some smell. So this will kind of mask some of that. So there's some advantages of doing it. I really like this technique for people that don't want to do much physical labor and don't have a whole lot of space to compost. I know I just showed you a lot of different composting techniques, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. If you're looking to just get started right away, I recommend the worm composting system that I showed you in the 5-gallon buckets. If you have a lot of space and a lot of inputs, such as yard waste and things, I recommend the 3-bay system. It's gonna be a way for you to get outside and get some exercise and enjoy nature. I'll be showing you each one of these compost systems in detail, how to set them up so that I can set you up for success. So if you're interested to learn a lot more about these composting and garden techniques, join us in the Garden Club this spring. The Garden Club is a month-to-month subscription learning regenerative and resilient skills such as composting and gardening, like we already talked about, and then we're going to add on beekeeping, how to raise chickens, how to grow mushrooms, how to make kombucha, do different home fertilizers and fermentations, and a lot more.